Hello, I'm Simon. Welcome to my workshop. And you're with me today on a very cold January day. It's probably 0 degrees outside. The frost has never really gone away from this morning. And I've spent the morning tidying my workshop. So I thought today would be a great day to give you a workshop tour. Let's get tinkering. We'll start in this corner of the workshop and I'll work my way round clockwise until we get back to this corner. We're going to start with this cupboard. This used to be a wall unit, but I put feet on it and a top on it, and it's now where I store all my electronic components and my multi-tool batteries and that sort of thing. This is always the messiest part of my workshop. It's where I tend to just dump stuff, and as a result it's never clear. This is the clearest it's been for a long time. Now you'll see all my drills are in stands. I 3D printed all of these. One of the good things with them is that they're magnetic, so you can just take the ones that you want to the job. I thought this was a good idea. I'm not completely convinced. It does keep them all together, but I think this year I'm going to have to come up with a different approach to storing things like drill bits. Moving across to the other side of the bench, I've got my soldering iron. This is where I keep my impact driver and my drill, my old power supply, multimeters, and then all my glues on this top shelf here. Throughout this video I will flash up a little icon if I have a video about an item that I mention, and I'll also flash up an icon if I say that I'm going to do something to solve a problem, because that'll indicate a future video that I'll hopefully do, and we'll see how many of those next year I've actually got round to doing. Moving back down, I have my charger for my drills, my cables for my multimeter, and if we go a bit further down I have a few holders for a hot air gun and a hot glue gun. To the side of my charger I have this small piece of pegboard, and I made this holder for all my mole grips, and it's left a load of pegboard empty which I need to use up, so that'll be a project later this year to tidy up my workshop a little bit more. Then below that I have my pliers holders, and then below that on magnetic strips I have all of my screwdrivers and all of my files. I've got plenty of light in my workshop because I've got 2 large windows and the door has got a large window in it as well. That really helps. My Triton spindle sander gets quite a lot of use, especially by my son when he's making his guitars that have lots of curves and contours on them. These vary in price quite a lot, but they all look pretty much the same, so if you get one that's this sort of model, have a look and just buy the cheapest one, because they're all made in the same place as far as I can tell. It works really well. It's got a small cast iron top on it. It's heavy enough not to move around when you're sanding. It's very quiet, and the dust collection on it is very, very good. Above the sander I have a wall unit that just has lots of hardware and cables and just bits and bobs. Next to my sander I have my father-in-law's old Burgess Bk3 Plus Bench Top Bandsaw. I had to restore it, it wasn't working when I got it. All of the orange parts that you see are bits that I 3D printed to replace bits that were on it before, or to upgrade bits that were on it before. The piece you see under the bed is an adapter I made so that it had dust collection on it, and the dust collection is really, really good, so you don't get a great deal of dust on the workbench, which is really nice. And as we move up, you'll see the area that I have here, which is the start of my tool wall. At the bottom is my holder for squares. Above is the holder I have for my planes, and I've got videos on me making them and restoring the planes. You see I've got a couple of spoke shaves there as well, which I've restored, and the chisels which I learnt how to sharpen and restored, that were my father's. If we go along, I've got a few magnets that hold things like those digital calipers, and just a lump of wood on the wall for my clamps. I need a better solution than that really for my clamps. Go down from my clamps, I have all of my Stanley knives. I've put different blades in each of my Stanley knives. It just means that rather than having lots of Stanley knives all with the same blades on, I can choose a Stanley knife that's most appropriate for the job that I want to do. To the left of my Stanley knives is my PPE. I've changed from having earmuff type PPEs to in-ear ear defenders. They seem to work a lot better. I'm not really happy with the dust mask. It's very comfortable and it works well, but it just doesn't work well for a glasses user. I constantly fog up, and I find that it seems to be safer to not use it and not be fogged up. So if there are glasses users out there who have a solution for not getting fogged up with wearing a dust mask, please let me know, because I'd be really interested to know what you do. Down from there and zooming out, you can see the whole of my tool wall, which is above my workbench, which I'll talk about in a minute. The spanners are all in size order. They're very handy to have them there in size order. And then I have a few hacksaws, hammers and measuring tapes, and then my tape organiser, which is really handy. I have a video on that. And then above that I have more saws and levels, and saw blades and larger hacksaws, coping saws and just normal wood saws. And then one of the things that I like a great deal is my little sanding station. This used to be a right pain in my garage. Never had anywhere for my sandpapers and so on. I always used to clutter the place up, and now they're always tidy. It's a really nice solution. And if we carry on round, we then get to another cupboard. Eventually these wall cupboards will go as well, and it'll become more tool wall, and in that cupboard is just junk really, so I'd need to get rid of it. Below that cupboard I have my bench sander. The bench sander is on a rotating base, and it shares that base with my bench grinder. This is quite good. I very rarely use the grinder, but when I do, it's perfectly positioned here. I use the bench sander quite a bit, so it just makes use of that space that would otherwise be lost behind the tool, and it's a lot easier to move around being on the rotating base than it would be if I was having to move them, because they're both quite heavy pieces of equipment. Next to the bench sander I have my pillar drill. I have a few videos on the pillar drill. It's only a cheap pillar drill. I've had it a very long time. It's got a little table that I made on top of it. It suits my needs for small jobs when you want a consistency, or you need a very perpendicular hole to be drilled. Then it's useful. When I use it, I seem to use it quite a lot, but I often don't use it much at all. You can see behind my pillar drill I have my hammer storage, and you've probably seen below that there's a mallet just sitting there because I have nowhere for it to go, so that's a problem I need to solve at some point. And then moving back to the middle of the tool wall, just below the tool wall, I have my main workbench. This workbench is an MFT style workbench. I got the top off of an eBay supplier, and it's a very nice top. I made the workbench myself. I was originally going to go down the track saw route instead of getting a table saw, so I invested in the Bench Dogs fence and a load of different dogs. The fence is a lovely fence. This is benchdogs.co.uk. It's a lovely piece of kit. It's got lots of flag stops on it, and I was very, very pleased with it, and I am still very pleased with it. What ruined the whole concept and idea was the track saw that I bought. The Evolution track saw is a bit of a pig. It's cheap and nasty, basically. That's my view of it. And that sort of put me off track saws. It is obviously at the very cheap end of track saws, but having had a bad experience with that, it put me off the idea of having a track saw instead of a table saw. What it also affirmed for me was that sometimes buying these budget tools are really just a waste of money. You are just throwing it away. And perhaps I should have bought an expensive Makita or Festool tool rather than spending the money on the Evolution one, which in effect I don't like using. It's very dusty, it's very messy. I try not to use it. I've now sort of reserved it really just for those occasions when I have large sheet materials that need cutting down, and then I'll use it. But other than that, I try to avoid using it. Pretty much the same goes with the Mitre Saw. That is, as all Mitre Saws are, it just throws dust everywhere, and it's very noisy. It's quite an accurate machine now because I re-engineered the surface on the Mitre Saw, but out the factory it was a bit of a pig. One of the things my workbench is missing is a wood vise. I have a wood vise on my Workmate, which I use quite a lot, but I'd like to get a wood vise onto this workbench as well. Originally I wanted to keep this front completely clear so that I could run the track saw along it if I needed to. I'm having second thoughts about that and think the utility of having a wood vise outweighs the utility of having to occasionally, or wanting occasionally, a free surface all the way along here to cut sheet goods down. So I think one of the jobs for next year is work out how I can fit a wood vise to the front of this workbench. The workbench is on very heavy duty casters and it's very easy to move around. It has a number of really nice features which, if you make something similar to this, I would really highly recommend. For instance, the flip up router table. It's only a very basic router table, but it suits me and it does the jobs that I want to do. and being a router table I think is a lot more accurate than a handheld router, and for someone that's a reasonable novice like myself, I think it's a lot easier to use a router table than a handheld router. You know, comments below if you think differently, but that's my view. It just feels a lot safer and more controlled using a router table with a fence, featherboards and so on than hand holding it. It also features this slide out lumbar support, which is pretty good. It's pretty solid. You can get quite a lot on there. It's over a year old now, not really had any problems with it. I've added storage down here for my track saw and the extra chack. And here is the electrics for my router. Now, I have a whole video on this, but the way this works is I have one socket that has power to it all of the time. I then have these two sockets, which are for power tools that I want to control the shop vac, and then this socket is for the shop vac. So the idea is you plug the shop vac in here, you turn this switch to auto, and then if either of these sockets is pulling a current and therefore is a power tool in use, the shop vac will turn on, and as soon as you stop using the power tool, a few seconds later the shop vac turns off. If I want to use the shop vac and I'm not using the power tool, perhaps just to clean up the surface, then I can just switch this switch to on and it overrides the auto and the shop vac will then come on. So that's a really handy feature. I really like that. These two sockets are also wired up to this on-off switch. So the idea is that when you've finished using especially the router, then I just press this button and it turns it off. So although it's on at the switch here, it'll still be off with this switch. And I've got a video on how I made this, and I managed to do it for free because I had all the parts, but it's a very cheap build for something like a shop vac. The cupboards underneath are mainly full of hardware or tools that I don't use very often. So I've got some power tools in one of them. I've got decorating tools like brushes and rollers and stuff. I'd really like to get rid of all of these cupboards, put all the tools onto wheeled bases or mobile bases so that I can move things around a lot easier. But I can't do that until I can work out where I put things like the decorating tools and the power tools that I don't use very often. This is the newest area of my workshop. I have my cabinet saw, which is an Axminster AC216 TS. I have the Axminster cabinet for it and the sliding table. And I can say that whilst I haven't had it very long, I'm really pleased with it and I'm really happy that I bought it. It's a very accurate machine, it cuts nicely and it feels safe and controlled when I'm using it. The one thing that I don't like about it is this. It's 1.5, maybe 2 meters long. I don't think it's 2 meters. Yeah, it's a miserly 2 meters if it's 2 meters. It's far too short. It needs to be 4 meters, 3 at the absolute minimum really. You know, this is just cutting corners to extremes. It's so short that it only really just reaches the wall, and this is with it pushed right against the wall. So I'm going to have to do something about this next year. I'm going to have to put sockets in on the wall so that I can use it. At the moment I have to have trailing leads and extension leads, which isn't ideal at all when you're using a table saw. Accompanying the table saw is my dust extraction system. This is the AC82E from Axminster. It's again one of their craft tools. This is an optional extra. This is the 1 micron dust filter. I've not had any problems with it. It works really well. It's overrated for the saw, and I don't get much in the way of dust on the surface really of the saw or in the air as far as I can tell. So this is working really well with this table saw. I'm really pleased with the combination of these two together. It's on wheels at the moment because that's how it came. My plan is to take it off of this stand and to have it on the wall up here above the table saw, and then I can have it dangling down, and potentially I've then got space here for another tool, and you know, that'd be something that I'll invest in next year hopefully, once I've got this off of the floor and up there and out the way. It's a very quiet machine. Got a video on this if you want to, if you're interested. But I won't turn it on because it's not plugged in. But this also suffers from a very short lead. You know, Axminster, it's a real shame because these are really nice tools. They're high quality, they're very well made, and then they come with a short lead. It's really disappointing. So above my table saw, I have some more lumber storage on the wall, just on the shelf, and then on your right just there is my lumber cart. So just to the side of my table saw I've got my shop vac and then my homemade lumber cart, which is looking reasonably tidy at the moment. And just to the right of that, although it moves around the workshop, is my Workmate. And my Workmate gets used mainly by my son when he's building his guitars. It's very rare for it to be empty of anything like it is today. But this tool gets used all the time, mainly in this configuration as a bench. The best feature by far on my Workmate, and probably one of the easiest things to make for your Workmate if it doesn't have it, is this insert here. This converts your Workmate into a workbench. And if you don't have a workbench, a Workmate in its normal function, in its normal form, this is with my wood vise on, so it's not in its normal form, but in its normal form can't really be used properly as a workbench. But as soon as you add a bit of chipboard to the middle, you've got yourself a workbench. And this I love, use it a lot, and it's always left in this format. However, this is just a dirty piece of old chipboard flooring. I'd really like to improve on this and add some additional functions. So that's perhaps a task for this year. I have a lot of videos on accessories for Workmates. They're my most popular videos and well worth watching. Getting to the end of the workshop tour now. So next to the lumber cart I have my 3D printer cabinet, and in front of that my workshop bin, which is completely full at the moment because I've just tidied up. And then to the right of that I have a cupboard that's got some stuff in that's not really workshoppy. The bikes sit in front of the cupboard. Above it I've got my spray cans and my silicone sealants and so on, plus my little workshop noteboard, which I use just to keep track of ideas of things that I want to do. Many that I have done and many that I'm still to do. And I have a video on organising your workshop with a whiteboard. So that's the end of my workshop tour. If you've got any questions on anything you've seen in this tour, then leave them in the comments below and I'll reply. And if you've got any thoughts on how I should organise my workshop or how you would do it differently, then also leave them in the comments below. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please leave a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more content like this, then please subscribe. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.